Morgan comes to us as senior lecturer in engineering at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. And he's also the 2016-2017 Fulbright Scholar. And in this capacity, he's currently pursuing a project called The Intrinsic Value of Indigenous Epistemology and Decision-Making Frameworks. He holds a number of academic titles, some of which you'll hear about. But what you might also listen to, especially for those of your students, are the hallmarks of a really creative and non-traditional career path, which is just one of the things that makes Dr. Morgan such a remarkable individual. After graduating in 1986 with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering, Dr. Morgan pursued a career in engineering and in public service. He rose quickly to prominence in both the professional and public sectors, with service to municipalities in New Zealand, as well as to his iwi, Ngāti Pikiao of Te Awa. His success caught the attention of the academic community, and in 2002 he began his career in academia. So, a few years after he got his first bachelor's degree. At the University of Auckland in the School of Engineering, he has served as Associate Dean, and in that context, he completed a path-breaking PhD. So, many associate deans that are pursuing their PhD at the same time. And he told us this morning about how that work arose out of the need to provide a service to his iwi. And this is, to me, the most inspired kind of scholarship, that scholarship that is at the nexus of applied and creative science. To us, Dr. Morgan has already demonstrated enormous generosity. He's accommodated a slightly tricky planning process on our part. He has already really buoyed the spirits and minds of my friends and colleagues on our sciences, English sciences, on a day when many of us are feeling quite discouraged. And he has generously put together this new talk on his reflections on the movement in Standing Rock, and in the true spirit of a rough cut, did that very spontaneously. So thank you so much for that. So our hope is that this is the first visit of many connections between our communities, and I really do invite you as students and faculties to think about what we can offer Dr. Morgan back based on his generosity to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia. Tihe Mauri ora. I'm going to move into Mauri a little bit later in the presentation, but first I would like to acknowledge the First Peoples of this place and their continued efforts to sustain the Mauri of their ecosystems of origin. So it's a big shout out to other Native American and Indigenous peoples. And a shout out to everybody else that's supporting their efforts and activities. So my name is Kepa Morgan, as Julia said. It reflects my mother being Maori and my father being of Welsh extraction. So one of the jokes at home was that every sort of cultural debate that occurred in New Zealand happened in our house beforehand. But it actually made for a very interesting upbringing, having to reconcile differences and different ways of thinking and understanding and being. So I'm the first person from my tribe to go to university and do all that sort of thing. So I can empathise with some of the Indigenous students here who are also first in their families, extended families and so on, that come to this quite different context. Okay, so what can I share with you about New Zealand? We've got a pretty impressive international reputation, I think. We're touted as being green and fabulous in different ways. I keep hearing that. One of the things I want to just share in terms of my own insight is our country, where we are now, the United States, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. The only 4 countries in the world that refused to sign a Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples when everybody else in the world did. So I think while there might be external perceptions, I think some of the tensions and the underlying lack of trust and other things, they're reflected in New Zealand just the same as they are here. So maybe this presentation can be seen in that way and said, this isn't just something we can do in New Zealand, but maybe it's relevant here as well. Okay, so into the good part of it, I suppose. Where are we? No notes. So I've got no notes on the slide I'm showing, but this was the abstract I put forward. And given that I was coming this close to being at Standing Rock, I thought it would be great to have some reflections on what's happening there. I'm not going to try and persuade you what's right and wrong and everything else. I'm going to leave that for you to make up your own mind. Rather, I'm going to share a situation, or a couple of situations we've been faced with in New Zealand that resonate in different ways with the situation at Standing Rock. And through sharing how we understood those, hopefully then there'll be a greater understanding, a better understanding of what's happening at Standing Rock. So the abstract, and I was told this is a rough cut, this is just like where it is at the moment, so I make no apologies for that. But I see Standing Rock being an interesting deadlock. Some may see the power as an imbalance, but I see the Indigenous peoples actually having the high moral ground. They have the support of other Indigenous peoples the world over. And not just Indigenous peoples, many people can understand the issues that are at stake here, and they have an international declaration. On the other hand, we have, DAPL and maybe some people's reluctance to actually take sides and do that sort of thing is, if DAPL doesn't go ahead, that will impact on an assumed quality of life of many of the people in the United States, because that will facilitate lower fuel prices, lower commodity prices, and sort of that side of things. But I think it's really dangerous to take the quick and easy gains over the long-term consequences, and that's what I'm going to try and play out a bit more in this talk. Okay, so there's you, Andrew. There's three articles that I think are relevant in this context of Standing Rock and really a lot of conflicts where Indigenous peoples are not satisfied and not really feeling acknowledged or included in processes that impact upon their traditional territories, whether they be lands, waters, or otherwise. So these three articles, they talk about the right to participate in decision making, the right to have the spiritual relationships with those resources recognised, whether or not they're owned by those peoples, and the right to be involved in conservation and protection and management of those resources. So those are fairly big, in terms of the intention of those articles, they're fairly big implications for countries like the United States, Australia, Canada and New Zealand. And there is some effort, I think, being made to provide for those relationships, for that involvement. Where I see this work fitting is enabling it in a way that people feel everybody is benefiting through that change. Okay, so we'll come to Standing Rock then. What about the Standing Rock Sioux rights? I don't know if anybody's really happy with that situation. People might say, okay, that's really bad, and I can understand some people probably a bit depressed already today. But I think when everybody agrees that there isn't an optimum situation, there's actually potential to look for other ways of doing things and understanding them. And at the base of this whole thing, at the base of it is actually a lack of understanding of what the different worldviews can contribute in terms of value. Okay. So I'm going to move from Standing Rock now, and I'm going to come back later on. But I just want to touch on a scholar from, I think, Scholar Bergs he's in Canada, and he has a book called Sacred Ecology. So and it's in like its 8th print, I think. It's a useful book. It's used in teaching a number of courses here in main continental United States. He sets up an understanding of the analysis of traditional ecological knowledge within our institutions in this way. He says, and I'm not sure we can make this out very easily, but local knowledge of ecosystems of origin sits here. It sits within an understanding of how resource management is to take place. That is enforced, or maybe not the right word, by a set of social institutions that normalise those ways of understanding and knowing, and then all of that sits within a worldview. Now, one of the things about Indigenous knowledge, and I think it's a perceived disadvantage by scientists and others from Western academia, is that this part is not transferable, because unless it sits within this greater context, it actually loses its relevance and its integrity. Okay? But the way I'm coming at it is, if you understand the influence of this worldview and why it makes us see things differently, then you can actually pull out the key messages and understandings in here, and those are actually transferable. So the traditional ecological knowledge itself it can be specific, and a situation came up just a minute ago in a discussion. We have the biggest monocultural forest of Pinus radiata in the world, and Pinus radiata is your Monterey pine from North America. Now, we're getting control of those forests as Indigenous peoples. I see a Pinus radiata monoculture, and I see a dead forest because there's no birds, there's no insects, there's pretty much nothing but pine forests and pine needles and acidified soil. So we're going to have control of this soon, and we have to figure out a way of doing it differently. We don't have any Indigenous knowledge about Pinus radiata. Now, we could go through and just wipe it all out and try and recreate the diversity that was there beforehand, but that's not really consistent with our way of thinking either. So what we need to do, and in this case, transferring traditional ecological knowledge that is amongst the Indigenous peoples of North America, is probably going to be very valuable to us, particularly around the paiute, the strategies of underburn to create the reproductive processes. I mean, we don't do that in New Zealand. We have evergreen forest. There's no reason to do some of those things. And, so we will be accessing, we hope, traditional ecological knowledge, and it will be transferable because we have nothing better. But in doing that, we'll need to understand these structures as well. Otherwise, we could go horribly wrong. Okay, so I'll move away from that now, and I want to talk a little bit more about worldviews, but I'll just start with mine. Nō reira, ko te ara wa tōku waka, ko ngā tipiki au tōku iwi, ko matawhauru te maunga, ko te roto iti kite ai e ihinga te moana. Ko te ranganora tōku tupuna, ko te puna whakarei arāke au tōku marae, nō reira ngā mihi ngā āhutanga tēnei wā kia koutou katoa, tina koutou, tina koutou, tina koutou. So, why am I speaking a different language? This is my cultural worldview. This is where I come from. My people, we belong to this place. The traditional lands of my people, in particular my extended family, are right here. This is all Indigenous forest. This is a lake that has been better, and it has been worse. It's actually getting better again. And it was the pivot for my PhD research, I guess. But this way of actually introducing myself to a group of people I've never met before, it's relevant because you actually now have some understanding of where my discussion is originating from. How is it informed? What are my ways of knowing? And so this ecosystem reflects, I think, in a big way who I am and what I'm sharing here. So the concepts that I'll talk about in terms of the Mauri concepts and that underpin the framework I developed, they come from here. And I mean, you might see that as being attractive, or maybe there's not enough high-rise buildings. I'm kidding with you. But it's important to understand that we all have different worldviews based on our cultural upbringing and the things that happen to us over our lives. It changes the way we understand and perceive what we're seeing in front of us. So in terms of cultural ways of knowing, of being, this is the name of our communal gathering place, Te Puna Whakarei Rākeao. Puna is a wellspring. Whakarei is to nurture, and Rākeao is an ancestor from maybe 400 years ago in my ancestral genealogy. So these buildings have been here less than 100 years. So this was named for a wellspring that nurtured one of our ancestors, and now we have our communal gathering place here. A lot of our ways of relating and knowing are tied to names that include water and places and how water relates to those. So it's our way of knowing. Water is fairly common. If I go a bit further away from New Zealand into the Pacific, our word for water is wai. If you go to Hawaii, it's wai. You can go to most of the Pacific Islands and that's the name for water. And the word for wealth in Hawaii is vai. Water, lots of water. If you have lots of water, you're wealthy. Here, water fits too. I'm sure you've heard this expression, niwi chunni. Water is life, you know? And it's something that I think has become more prominent with the Standing Rock situation. So this is a way of knowing that isn't as pronounced in our Western worldview. I think this speaks to maybe another way of knowing, and this is from an elder that was was interviewed with Kathleen Kovilu's work, and one of the informants said, I think that money speaks too loudly. And that's maybe a problem that we're having, is the money is actually able to be quantified and represented in ways that it outcompetes some of the other knowledge that's relevant as well. So I'm just getting into this worldview thing. Before I talk about some other worldviews, I just want to say that the cultural bases of our worldviews, they're constrained by the imposed limitations of our knowledge systems. So one of the things that happens is if we are brought up in a scientific mindset, it tells us a whole lot of stuff is actually not real and not possible. And I find that intriguing because science has acknowledged about 8% of the universe is physical matter. And then there's another 92% that's energy and all sorts of other things. And it's called dark matter, dark energy, because we don't understand it. But what's interesting is science has the arrogance to say that a whole lot of stuff known to Indigenous peoples doesn't exist, yet at the same time it acknowledges that 92% of the universe is unknown. So there's something sitting there that we have to actually have a good hard look at. You know, why is it that we don't accept somebody else might know more in a non-scientific way than we do in science? Well, I'm going to come to that in a minute, but this is the thing. Each culture patterns perceptions of what's real, what's possible, probable, and improbable. And in doing that, we actually limit the amount of knowledge that we can include in our ways of understanding situations. The problem is that science assumes that we all think the same way. It makes that assumption. You know, the scientific truth is the only truth. And so if something's described scientifically, then everybody should accept it because it's the only way that it exists. Now I'll go to the scientific worldview. Okay, so hands up if you don't believe in gravity. Good. Now you either didn't understand my question, or you're saying, yeah, I understand gravity. So tell me, how would you know which way was up? Without the concept of gravity, right? So up is actually a definition that's understood when you accepted the concept of gravity. Now tell me this, can you see gravity? Can you hear it? Smell it? Taste it? Touch it? You just told me you believed in gravity. This invisible thing you can't sense. Less than 500 years ago, being able to measure gravity was a phenomenal change in the understanding of European science. It was actually the beginning of science, European science, Western science. And the interesting thing about it is it's a huge shift in understanding because it shifted the Earth from the world from being the centre of the universe to the Earth orbiting the Sun in our heliocentric universe, which is made up of a whole lot of solar systems. Now that's a really fundamental shift in thinking. And it was the measurement of gravity and the modelling of the relationship between the moving planets and the Sun in terms of the inverse, the gravitational force being the inverse square of the inverse square of the distance that they're separated. Now, we've established everybody accepts this concept. I've also established that you'd be hard-pressed to persuade me that it actually exists. Yeah. And we measure the acceleration caused by gravity, gravitational constant 9.81 meters per second squared. Now, it's a useful concept that explains all sorts of phenomena. In fact, it was the basis of most of my degree. And I have a PhD in civil engineering, so it's probably fair amount of the basis of my PhD as well. But we accept it. Why? Because it's useful. It helps us understand a whole lot of things that we can see, a whole lot of phenomena, relationships between physical things. That's what it explains. Now, scientists have this thing where we'll accept a concept until it's disproven or a better conceptual explanation comes from. So, here's another concept, but it comes from Indigenous knowledge. And it's called Mauri. And Mauri is the attractive force not between two physical objects, but it's the attractive force between the physical and everything else that makes life possible. Okay, so just let that soak for a little bit. Now, it explains the difference between life and death, potential. It explains how we become who we are. It explains the life-supporting capacity of collectives, so it can be used for a whole ecosystem. It can be used for us as a collection of people and chairs and paint on the walls and light, and everything that's in this room comes together and we have a particular motive. Everything I say in this talk is going to impact upon your motive. Maybe not to a huge degree, but I could really depress everybody here and that would reduce your motive. Because then what's happening is, and there's some studies that have shown that if you're depressed, your resistance to other complications, disease and things like that is reduced. So Mauri can explain all those things, and it's just the one concept, it's the life-supporting capacity. And I'm asking you to accept it because you just said to me that you accepted gravity. Right? How come Mauri? When I started looking at a problem around our water, I had to look back at what my elders have been doing in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, and we had the opportunity at that point in time to voice our perception on what we perceived as new grievances that were being created against Indigenous people. In every case that was brought, it was about environmental impacts, it was about the cultural offence caused by the denigration of food sources and their integrity and their Mauri. And Mauri came up everywhere because it's a very pervasive concept in my culture. So all of these are about impacts upon Mauri. The interesting thing is this was all anecdotal evidence and it stopped huge engineering projects. This is a syn fuels plant. This is a wastewater scheme that had to be totally scrubbed, totally new solution. This one here led to New Zealand's biggest infrastructure projects, replacement projects. This one over here, that was a housing project for an Indigenous group who were going to benefit from their houses, but because the wastewater was going into their lake, into their estuary, it contravened their traditional cultural values, which were more important than having a house. So they challenged something that was being provided particularly for them. I'm just putting that one in there though to show that Mauri weren't advancing these claims just to try and be haters and wreckers, which is where it would be labelled by somebody I won't mention. So you've got this situation, you've got Mauri. So Mauri was really relevant then. Mauri continues to be more relevant in New Zealand today. This is where I live in the Hauraki Gulf, on an island called Waiheke that some of you may have heard about, right on the doorstep of Auckland, if you like, it's part of Auckland. And you can see these policy statements are being made. This one has no Maori representation, yet they're talking about lifting its Mauri in terms of the Gulf. This one, the Maori one, well, that very simple term says enhancing the Mauri of the Hauraki Gulf. Somebody's speech, they're talking about how they want to see this managed, and you can see Mauri comes up in every line of their discussion. So Mauri is a very widely understood now concept in New Zealand, and it's very relevant. So, the attractive force between the physical and the metaphysical, or whatever else it is, that facilitates life. Now, I had the concept to address the problem, but I needed a framework within which to use it. So, it was done this way, acknowledging that different worldviews will see things differently. I subjectively decided there were 4 dimensions of Mauri in the world. And they're easy to understand from a sustainability perspective because they're environmental, social, economic, plus cultural. Now, they're not called that in Mauri, but if you wanted to think of well-beings, you could think of 4 well-beings in a sustainability context. Now, the trick here is that when we come up with this subjective representation of reality, which is the Mauri model, that could be alienating to one group or another in any context. So instead of getting into the analysis, what we do first is we talk to all the different groups and we say, hey, what dimension is the most important, or what 2 dimensions? What's the hierarchy of importance of those dimensions that is how you know? Because if somebody prioritises one of those dimensions the most highly, then I would have I would actually trust them to know what the indicators were that were relevant in terms of that. But if they didn't prioritise another dimension, I wouldn't expect them to have any relevant knowledge, or they wouldn't have much relevant knowledge about how that indicator, or how indicators reflecting that dimension can be chosen or measured. Does that make sense? So if you take that approach, then everybody in the room disagreeing is actually the best situation you can have. Yeah? Because everybody has different drivers, and so the thing they're passionate about, they can provide indicators and how to measure them that is going to be the best way to describe that indicator for the situation we're looking at. Now that's the best representation of your problem or your challenge that you can have. But you can't get it without everybody and the diversity of understanding and ways of knowing and worldviews. So having many worldviews is actually a benefit, a huge one. So we get the quantification of worldviews. That determines our indicator sets, which is going to be inclusive. The really good thing about that too is that if a particular proponent is identifying the indicators they want and telling you how they're measured, very hard for them to walk away from the analysis once it's been done. Yeah. So we've got the indicators, we can measure them. I've come across developed a way of measuring Mauri, life supporting capacity. And then once we have the indicators measured, with some objective thresholds established, we can establish what the trends are and so on for each of the dimensions. We can combine the dimensions to reflect the worldviews that we started with. Now here's the trick. If the worldview sensitivity analysis on that data reflects the holder of that worldview, then that validates the data set. If another worldview looks at it that doesn't agree with the other one, and through their lens they agree with the data set, that validates it again. Okay, so you can see that it's self-validating. That's the Mauri model, the 4 dimensions. I won't go into why they sit in a takarangi, it's a deeper conversation. But they're really there to show that they take different prominence depending on who you are. And you might see your way of knowing reflected in that diagram, hopefully. Or maybe you don't. But it doesn't matter because they're all moving and they're all different sizes, and that's what it is. Here's how we quantify the Mauri. It's relatively straightforward maths. I've simplified the analytic hierarchy process that I started with so that it's accessible to anyone. And it's just a pairwise comparison that determines the relevant hierarchy of the 4 dimensions for a particular worldview. So we park that informs who chooses indicators. We have indicators, and all we need to do with our indicators to measure life supporting capacity is first we want to define what's no change for the indicator. And I'm cheating here because I just finished talking about grizzly bears as an example. So you have an expert on grizzly bears. They'll be able to tell you what no change in the population of grizzly bears, their Mauri, collective Mauri is, based on natural placement and loss. And so you'll get an upper and a lower tolerance on what zero change for that population is. And you might get into more detail around the actual health of the grizzly bears and that sort of thing. Now, if the result is seen outside zero change, then it's either got to be good for the grizzly bears or bad, so plus and minus. And you could set a threshold that was the technical extinction of the grizzly bears, where the numbers were so low that they were technically extinct, they weren't going to survive. Or you could set a threshold where the grizzly bears were healthy and populous and everything was fine for them, but they limited the carrying capacity of that ecosystem. So that would be +2 and -2. Now, for any action in the past and the future, right now, you can work out what the impact is upon the grizzly bears. You can work out what the state of Mauri is at a point in time, and you can work out what the trends are, and it's objective. Because these thresholds should be constant. And if they're coming from the expert on grizzly bears, you've got a good indicator about it, it's objective, and everybody can understand what's happening. Okay, so I'm just going to park that, but one of the points I'll just make is that in this Mauri meter, sustainability is nowhere near the tipping points. And just an aside, the Paris Agreement, we're sort of setting a tipping point over here. And you know, I think we've missed the boat because we should actually be looking at trying to get ourselves over this side. most of the decisions that are claimed to be sustainable are actually over here. And when you look at it in an absolute way like this, it just does not make sense. Because we're putting a lot of faith in the inherent resilience and luck. And I think we can do better than that. So, come to a couple of case studies so that we can have a discussion. I think I really do need to wind this bit up and we can discuss.
There's 30 minutes left in the full session, so manage it.
Okay, well, I'm not pressing as much. Okay, so I mentioned the transferability of Indigenous knowledge as an issue. So I'll start off with a case study in Papua, which isn't in New Zealand, and culturally we don't speak the same languages, but I do know that there's similarities in Indigenous there. And then I'll talk about, I think maybe one or two case studies in New Zealand. I won't give you too much because I want to talk about something, one of these tonight. So, and I think we've got that big circle. My geography isn't the best. I know that we're in the continental North America, and I was in Hawaii, where my framework has quite a bit of relevance as well because of our very similar language and conceptual ways of knowing. So here's this, it's a journal article that's been published if you want to have a look. But I'm just using this one to start with to show you the end point you can get to in terms of a Mauri model analysis. This was done by an Indigenous student from Asmat, from Papua. 3 parts. She was faced with a huge challenge. We decided not to tackle that straight away. We decided to look at how to transfer the Mauri model to Papua first. That was a third of the thesis. Second part was to try it out on a seemingly easy problem. And this is the problem: the establishment of a water supply for a expat community, so for a town called Agats in the Asmat Regency. And this is interesting. Maybe it's not unique, but it's interesting because it sits in the tidal range. So the tide comes and goes in this village, and it's in an Indigenous wetland forest. Now, you can see in this one, it's probably not very clear, but there's water bottles here, plastic water bottles like this. And that's how all of the water is coming to this community. You can see all the vehicles travel, well, not really vehicles, there's some electric motorbikes and push bikes, and people are travelling on raised wooden platforms, and all the houses are raised above the tidal zone. So, putting a water supply in this situation probably is a no-brainer, isn't it? The Indigenous people weren't happy with it for a whole range of reasons, but the project went ahead because the local government really just couldn't see what was wrong with their project. They couldn't possibly see the downside. So indicators in the 4 dimensions, and then the worldviews. And Elizabeth, this is the worldview drivers for the local government. And what you have is a very strong push from social well-being. So it's the concern for social well-being, that the public health can be improved through having the water not come in plastic bottles and being available for different things. Quarter of the driver is economic, and then cultural and environmental make up the last part. And sorry for the colours, they're very close. Conversely, the Asmat people, the Indigenous people, 1/3 about their cultural identity and being able to be who they are, 1/3 for their ecosystem, and then the economic and the social making up roughly the third remaining. Now, do you think that'll make a difference to the analysis? Yeah, okay, it'll make a difference. I mean, you might have a guess at how much of a difference, but I think you'll be surprised at the next slide. What I'm going to show you is a slide of this project over 30 years, and the blue line is going to be equally weighted, so the 4 dimensions just weighted equally, which nobody has that perspective. And then what we'll do is on one of the graphs, this graph that comes up here, it's going to show this worldview and how it's understood. And you'll see why it was such an obvious decision for the local government to make and the engineers. But then you'll see what the Asmat people's experience of this solution is. Okay? So there's the first one. The red line is the local government's understandings. And they go from a negative Mauri situation to a good positive one. And for the Asmat people, the yellow line represents what their understanding, their experience of this solution is. Now, it's very easy to show that this represents a transfer of Mauri, of wealth, from one community to another. Now, the thing about this is the project had already been done, and there was no legal way that the Asmat people could change what had happened. But having done this research, it's influenced the local government, and they're now trying to address all the things that they now realise are actually very important in this solution. Because the inequity that's been created by that project is really clear. And I think, it's not about us actually controlling decisions and making them ourselves. It's actually about making decisions transparent so that the whole community can make the decision maker accountable. We want it to just be in control. There's no guarantee that we do it any better. But if we have a way of making the drivers of the decision transparent so that everybody can understand, then there's remedies. There's other politicians that would like to be in that politician's position of power. And if they can see it's that clear, and the people can see it's that clear, well then the result should be really clear too. So just to comment, the work I've done draws on Indigenous knowledge, but I also used underlying principles from systems thinking. And Forrester was a very early writer in this area. This is the one that I think is the most important. It's not about having the flashiest supercomputer. It's not about having a black box model that tells you scenario A is better than scenario B. That doesn't change the way people think. Communicating a situation in a way that it communicates with people's values and beliefs, so they have to believe it, will change their actions. Okay? So Forrester talked that, he said these models are pretty much of questionable value unless they change the way people perceive a situation. However, if they're going to be effective, they have to communicate with and modify the prior mental models as people's beliefs determine their action. And the previous example I just showed you, that's exactly what happened for those local body engineers. They couldn't even see how the people and the issues they were raising were even relevant to what they were doing. They were so convinced that they provided, who challenges a water supply? Okay, so next one, and this one is coming closer to the situation I think you have standing up. This is the Tukutuku River. It's an iconic river in New Zealand, one of 4 that's been identified through our rivers and waters process that's happened. And so what happens is the region that this is in is actually where I was born, and I have genealogical connections here, not my strongest links, but certainly connections. And okay, it's going to do it in a different order to what I wanted. This is the reality of it in scientific terms. If you want one of these to produce milk for a year, 4,200 litres, it has a gate value, at the gate value at the farm of 50 cents a litre, so $2,400. That's how much water it will consume. I think it's 5 million litres. Okay. So if you want to convert the lands in that area from dry stock to dairy, which is much more lucrative, you need lots of water, because that's only 1 cow. And that's quite a lot of water. This is an Olympic swimming pool, or 2 of them. 2 Olympic swimming pools, so you're talking a lot of water. Now that's what's needed, and I'll paint the picture that the New Zealand government wants trade, China wants our milk powder. Okay, regional council, it'd be like your state administration, have a port, and this will quadruple the goods going through the port. That equals economic revitalisation in a region where they don't believe that they are making economic progress fast enough, as if it's going to happen forever. But anyway, I'm starting to show my bias. So that's what they want to do. The landowners, their land value will triple overnight. Now there's some environmental people that are opposing this because it will destroy the stream. In fact, it requires holding 90% of the flow. Yeah, and this is an iconic river. And then there's the iwi, Ngāti Kaunga, if you don't really want it as. So what we did, oops, I'll just back up so what we have is the 4 dimensions. This was actually done in 3 days. Somebody was the expert witness for our tribe. They changed sides a week before evidence was due. My iwi rang up and they said, well, look, you're related to us. We know you're an academic, so we expect you work all night anyway. We want you to explain this. So this was done in 3 days. All of the data was there. There was all the scientific reports, there was cultural impact assessments, everything. So it was just a matter of mining that to find what the indicators were, the thresholds, and then doing the analysis, right? So don't apologise, it's a little bit rough. It just takes the context that this irrigation dam goes in. So this is the Mauri now. During construction, at the beginning of the consent life and at the end of the consent life. So you can see the very engineering sort of dates. These are the indicators in a dimension, and they're just equally averaged, just the average of those indicators. And you get a number for each dimension at that point in time. So you might look and go, dang, is that simplistic? What about all the the complexity in that? Well, the thing is, this is objective, because these are being scored between -2 and +2. And really, at this level of complexity, you only need to know where you're heading. You don't need the answer to 4 decimal points. You're going to know if you're on the green side of the curve or the red side. That's all you need to know. And how far are you towards the one direction? So what happens? You can plot those numbers over time. And so you've got a white line there, which is the average across the whole lot. It's that white line. You've got this blue line here for the ecosystem. So you can see the ecosystem is damaged and it doesn't come back that much. This is the impact upon Ngāti Kaunga. You can see there's a big negative and it doesn't recover at all, hardly. This is the social well-being based on the social impact reports. So you can see there's a big impact, and then gradually, eventually you get a little bit of positive. And then for the economic, well, on day 1, as soon as it's commissioned, you get the tripling of economic value of the land, and then you get the generated value from having conversion to dairy. So you can see what's going on in this, and people will look at that and go, oh yeah, okay, that's interesting. Now here's the thing, if I can put the worldview of the developer and look at this, and it makes sense for them, but I can also put the worldview of the Indigenous people on this, and you can see why they're totally opposed, that validates this analysis. Because you've got adversarial understandings in the same situation, we're not changing any data. All we're changing is what dimension takes precedence and how much. So in a similar way to what I mentioned, if we just did an equal average of the 4 dimensions, that's what it looks like. It starts out here. Sorry, you can't see this line, but there's a very faint grey line. And actually finishes, surprisingly enough, exactly where it started. So you start at one point of Mauri and you end up at the same point. Which you can sort of say, oh, well, that means we can do it. But you can integrate this curve against this line and you'll get a value of Mauri on the vertical axis times time, which is 21 Mauri years. Now what does that represent? That represents the life supporting capacity of this whole system that's been ripped out. That's resilience, that's potential, that's happiness. You can measure it, it's all these different things. It's cultural vitality. That's what's been removed, 21 Mauri years. Now, okay, some people might challenge that, particularly the developers. But let's have a look through, that's the Indigenous lens for New Zealand in a lot of situations. I'll go straight to this. So the blue line is the equity weighted. The yellow line is what the developer understands when you weight the dimensions differently, and the green line is the Indigenous understanding. So there's a 3 motor year hit during construction because there's a lot of investment required, but there's a 9 motor year benefit to those, not to everybody, to the ones that have the positioning to benefit, the landowners and those that are involved in the consumerist processes of producing milk powder and selling it to China. Yeah? And that's one way of looking at it. Another way of seeing it is through the Indigenous eyes, which is even a greater imposition. It's 27 motor years that are diminished from that whole system in the eyes of the Indigenous people. So I'll put it to you, this is the same thing that you're looking at Standing Rock. Now it's not a question of who's right and who's wrong, because all worldviews are valid, because we're all here. But it's about the decision maker making a choice that's transparent. So if the, and to give you the background, this was presented in the hearing. 34 days this hearing went for, 32 days of evidence for the project, and we got a day and a half at the end on our marae, on our communal gathering place. Moana Jackson opened the first day, and it was entirely about the legal context, starting from UN DRIP right through to local law. And I started the second day, and we started with the Mauri model analysis, which said, okay, you understand the legalities, now here's what's really happening in a way that is agreed to by everybody. So presented that, and then there were other presenters that gave these specific case studies along the river and so on that reinforced this analysis. We didn't have to reinforce the scientific evaluations of the developer because what was their evidence? So they couldn't challenge it anyway, is what I'm saying. At lunchtime on the second day, one of the 3 investors, it was a regional council, it was one of the big banks in New Zealand, and it was actually a tribe from the South Island called Naita. Mark Solomon was there. He stood up at lunch and he said, there's no way we'll do anything anywhere else in this country that we wouldn't do at home, and we definitely won't be doing this at home. See you. So they walked out. That was 1/3 of the capital being invested in the project. Now the interesting thing is the commissioners or judges, they never sit in with people to eat. They have their own little room, you know, and all the food comes to them and they're in isolation. On the first day, they could hear all the singing and entertaining that we do as part of our way of hosting and looking after our people. So you eat, but we try and fulfill you with everything else we can. And they were in this room, and they thought, oh, you know, we should be out there. So they had a table set up. So the second day, they're sitting there when Mark Solomon gets up and says, we're out of here. Now, they've had to explain what it means. They've got 3 investors. One actually says right then and there, we're walking. In fact, the trust bank, the banking investor, pulled out in that week. Okay, and it's no longer economically viable. The economics don't stand up anyway. But the point I'm making is that this reality was very compelling for those commissioners. So everybody assumed this was a done deal. They turned it down. Or at least they made it so hard that they couldn't do it. So it's not about having control over the decision so much as making the decision maker accountable. Now I'm just going to quickly go through this last one because I'm talking about it tonight. But in my traditional territories, we have had a disaster, an environmental disaster that is New Zealand's worst maritime environmental disaster. This gives you an idea. A container ship runs aground between the round robin and the semi-finals of the Rugby World Cup, which we were hosting in October 2011. And this is the result. These are birds. Those are our coastlines. And we responded on the ground. We were actually the first to respond. And scientists have actually said that they've dug in the beach to try and find the lens of contamination. And they say they can't find it. Because we mobilised and we cleaned up immediately, we found different ways of doing things that scientists didn't know about. But that aside, we were also able to influence the long-term environmental recovery plan. The government wrote their one and they said, we want to restore the environment to its pre-green estate, green as the boat. And it sits out in this, on the visible horizon out there. This is Tauranga City. And the thing is, we said, well, that's not going to work because this is a sacred site to us. and it's important. You didn't even know it was there. Obviously the ship driver wasn't really clear on it either. But it's really important. So we want you to include an understanding of Mauri in it. And you can either have an additional goal or you can just add Mauri. So they said to restore the Mauri of the affected environment to its previous state. It's the goal, the only goal. Now that happened because of previous work we've done and we're getting traction, as I said, with this framework. So it's got a definition of Mauri. You can see that it hasn't got one word in English. You've got all sorts of ways of trying to describe it because it's a collective. And it's in things that science doesn't believe are like mist, like a rock, like the spoken word. Okay? We actually believe that the greatest harm that can come to you in oratory, because there's no rules, our people will tell us what to say, and you stand up and you say it, and you deliver it. If it's going to be cutting, you deliver it as cuttingly as you can. Now, in that sort of context, you manage yourself physically, so you know how to defend yourself physically, but that's a nothing. I mean, you could even get killed. That wouldn't actually be that bad. And you probably think I'm exaggerating here, but think about it this way. If somebody said something that was directed at your family, you can't sort of go like this. Say, no, I didn't hear. Which, sticks and stones may break my bones, but nature never hurt me. That the total antithesis. We believe that what he was spoken, if it was that targeted, it could affect future generations. It could affect your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. And that's a huge threat. It's a way bigger threat than somebody coming over hitting you on the head. Because you might be gone, but your kids and your grandkids are there. Carry on. So, this explanation of Mauri is actually really hard to explain in English because it's you've got such a difference in worldviews. But it's in there. So what happened was that meant that our aspirations in terms of that ecosystem were empowered. Because the experts actually said, well, you can't restore Mauri. The engineering consultancy couldn't change. Now, two things happened. One, no, I won't go to that. We were able to determine the pre-rend state with very little scientific evidence. So the four coloured lines are the Mauri of the four dimensions. The black line is the average. And that takes us through to October 2011, and our average is 0.48. Is the number. So if you're going to restore it to that, we have the indicator sets. This is what happens. There were economically driven decisions that really ended up costing a lot of money because they delayed action and they didn't understand the context they were in. So this stuff's sort of happening. So you have the rendered grounding, you have the four dimensions coming down, and then you have them recovering through human action as well as the natural restorative capacity ecosystem and other things. You see it coming back, and these are every 3 months, all of the indicators being assessed. We're using all the indicators the scientists have got and all of ours as well, all of the big understanding. Now, you might think that when that line hits this line, you're actually recovered. And this is the same point I made before, but what you actually have to do is you have to get this area, the integration of that curve against that line. When you get that whole area above that line, you have restored the potential of this ecosystem. Until you do that, you might have returned to a point in time state, but you've removed potential. So to actually reinstate the potential, you have to do that. Now, here's the rub. They're still cleaning up. And this is the second most expensive environmental cleanup in the world. It's not an oil tanker, it's a container ship. Now, sure, it's cost them a lot because they didn't make very good decisions. So there's two lessons here. One, if they hadn't made the decisions that were consistent with another way of knowing, it could have cost them a huge amount less. There's no way it should have cost how much. It's actually more than $500 million now. Now, why are they still cleaning up? Well, their lawyer refused to come to New Zealand in the first place. Thought he'd be, I'm serious, I know him, Constantinos, we're good friends. When he did come 4 months later, we insisted that he came to talk to us because we were the ones that were being impacted the greatest. So we treated him with the same dignity and respect we would any visitor. That's our way of doing things. But we explained to him what he'd done, or what the people he represented had done. He gave us an undertaking that they wouldn't leave until they put it right. Every time his engineers told him they'd done enough, He'd say, hang on, I've got to go and talk to my friends in Ngāti Piki. And talk to us, we would actually put up our analysis. He would turn to his experts and say, have you got anything that refutes that? They'd say no. He said, well, they'll take us to court and we'll be right back out where we're trying to be. So we're not leaving until you've got evidence that shows that we've done what we need to do. These people have the evidence. So it actually empowered our voice in that process. So there was a lot of political divide and rule going on in that process, and to get over that, we actually created a web-based resource so that other tribes and that could actually do the same analysis we were doing about them. So you can go online and use this for free, modiometa.com. It's very simplistic, only has 3 indicators per dimension. It'll do the worldview analysis. Have a play with it. The thing I say to people is, you might be struggling to get everything I've talked about, but if I got up here and talked about riding a bike, it would be exactly the same. Until you get on the bike and start pedaling the pedals, fall off a few times, don't know how to ride a bike. Okay, so same thing applies here, just jump on. It'll take you 30 minutes to do an analysis. One catch-all, if you're doing that, don't assume you understand everybody's worldview. Understand your own first, and then you're actually in a position to start interpreting others. If you're interpreting others' worldviews without understanding your own bias, it's called prejudice. Yeah. So be very careful to use a participatory action approach where you involve the people that you're, in terms of the context you're working on. This has been evaluated independently. There's a set of sustainability principles called Worldview STAB, created in 2009 by some experts in Italy, and some research in New Zealand that was funded by the government looked at 11 potential sustainability indicator sets from around the world and in New Zealand. The 3 in red, this is from Canada, the top one is from the United States. They were identified as meeting all of the principles. And this existed before the principles were developed. Both of these, I think, were developed after, so the design. Now the thing was, they said these work, but they're not transferable. So there's actually a bit of irony there. These are developed from a scientific perspective, and they're not transferable. But this process is, and that's why it's called the Mauri model there, but it's actually a framework. The model is the reality of 4 dimensions. The framework is the processes that allow you to get objective, repeatable analysis. Okay, Loretta, I think ultimately water connects us all. We really know this in the Pacific. Funny thing is, we actually have similar languages throughout the Pacific, more similar than many of the continental-based Indigenous peoples. So I can speak Hawaiian. I can converse not as well, but in Samoa and Tahitian. I can speak Easter Island Mauri from Rapa. We know this. We're hoping everybody else is knowing it too, because how we impact its Mauri impacts us. So it's time to choose, everybody. We can keep wandering around over here. I don't have to tell you what that means. Or we can go the other way. Loretta, ni tuni, tina koutou, tina koutou, tina koutou.